in 8 minutes. Today's return-powered flyby burn sets us up on a trajectory to splash down off the coast of California just a few days from now on December 11th. And you were seeing some thruster firings there as Orion maneuvers to the proper attitude for today's burn. Now less than 6 minutes, 30 seconds until we lose signal with Orion. The burn will start in 8 minutes and 40 seconds. Orion is currently 253 miles above the lunar surface. Today's 3-minute and 27-second burn will take place with the Orbital Maneuvering System, or OMS engine. That's the largest engine on the European Service Module. Today's burn will change the velocity of the spacecraft by 960 feet per second during its 3-minute, 27-second burn. Closing in on 5 minutes away from our anticipated loss of signal with Orion. We will not have signal with Orion because the moon will be blocking out the signal to the Deep Space Network. However, when we swing back around on the other side of the moon, we do anticipate to regain those communications. And we are hearing that Orion is in the proper burn attitude. 6 minutes and 40 seconds away from the start of today's 3-minute, 27-second burn. Just 4 minutes until today's loss of signal. As you can see from this telemetry-driven animation, Orion is now 202 miles away from the lunar surface. And you're looking at a live view inside the White Flight Control Room here at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. NASA Flight Director Judd Freeling is leading the team on console at this hour. We were tracking a loss of signal about 2 minutes and 40 seconds from now, but we are hearing that we did get that loss of signal a little earlier than expected, but that is to be anticipated from time to time. So now the next major milestone that we'll look ahead towards is the return-powered flyby burn less than 5 minutes from now. While we are traveling behind the moon, we do not have signal with the spacecraft because the moon is blocking the connection to the Deep Space Network. We anticipate that loss of signal to last about 30 minutes. And our counterparts here in this shot here in the European Space Agency Control Center in Noordwijk in the Netherlands. The European Space Agency's contribution to Artemis is, of course, the European Service Module, where the Orbital Maneuvering System, or OMS, engine is located. That's the engine that will be used for today's 3 minute and 27-second burn to propel us around the backside of the moon and commit us to a trajectory back to Earth ahead of a splashdown on December 11th. We're now less than 3 minutes away from the start of that 3 minute 27-second burn. Right now, we do not have signal with the Orion spacecraft. That is expected as the vehicle is traveling behind the moon. This loss of signal will last about 30 minutes. And as Orion comes back around the other side of the moon, we will be able to regain communications with the vehicle. Now less than 2 minutes from today's return-powered flyby burn. And you do see the team here in Mission Control stand up and stretch their legs right now. Oftentimes they'll use this time to catch a quick break while the vehicle is in the loss of signal period. Again, today's loss of signal is expected to be about 30 minutes in length. One minute until the start of today's return-powered flyby burn. "30 seconds until the start of today's 3 minute 27-second long burn, committing Orion to a return home." "15 seconds until burn start." And we do expect the burn to be underway. Again, this is a 3-minute, 27-second long burn. Because Orion is behind the moon and we do not have signal with the vehicle, we will not be able to confirm that the burn has began or the results of that burn until we come back around to the other side and regain communications on the Deep Space Network. Today's burn is being completed with the Orbital Maneuvering System, or OMS engine. That's the largest engine on the bottom of the European Service Module. Today's 3-minute and 27-second long burn will be the longest during the Artemis I mission used by the OMS engine, but the OMS engine can fire for up to 16 minutes in length. Now approaching the 2-minute mark into today's return-powered flyby burn, 1 minute and 27 seconds remaining. We're approaching the 3-minute mark into today's burn. Again, this burn is critical as it will slingshot us around the backside of the moon and place us on a trajectory ahead of a splashdown off the coast of California. 3 minutes into the burn, 27 seconds remaining. And we do expect the burn to be complete at this time. Again, because we are behind the moon and do not have signal with the spacecraft, we will not be able to confirm until Orion comes back around the other side of the moon. We are anticipating that acquisition of signal about 24 minutes and 45 seconds from now. And if you're just joining us, the return-powered flyby burn, the burn that is going to send Orion back around the other side of the moon in anticipation of a splashdown next week off the coast of California, has completed. Orion is still behind the moon at this hour, and we are in a period of a loss of signal with the vehicle. We're anticipating to get that acquisition of signal back less than 24 minutes from now. But while Orion continues its journey around the moon, I do have a very special guest joining me today. This is Najud Moranci. She is the chief of the Exploration Mission Planning Office here at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. So thank you so much for joining us today, Najud.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Super special to be here for RPF.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an exciting moment indeed. This burn really commits Orion to a return journey home. But before we talk about that, I do want to talk a little bit about some of the work that your group is doing as part of the Artemis program. Now, this is an uncrewed test flight of the Orion spacecraft, but there's other components of Orion, including some robotics work that your group is working on. Can you talk a little bit about that and how it helps contribute to Artemis?
Yeah, there's a lot of different components to the Artemis as an enterprise, right? You know, Orion, SLS, this is our crewed vehicle to the moon, but we're also working on systems like Commercial Lunar Payload Service, which is delivering science payloads to the moon very soon, in the next year or so, hopefully starting those launches. And that's really the precursor for all of the logistics and the elements we're going to need as we build out a whole exploration enterprise on the surface of the moon.
That's great. I'm looking forward to seeing those land soon. And another aspect of your group is astromaterials. So during Apollo, many lunar samples were brought back to study, but during Artemis, we're going to be landing in a different location on the lunar South Pole. So how will our studies be different, and what will we be looking for this time around?
Yeah, part of our directorate includes the astromaterials and the curation of those materials. So all of the Apollo samples that came home came here to Johnson Space Center, and we have a dedicated facility that maintains them, manages the samples to send out to the science community for investigations. And that will also happen, they already do that for other samples, like the comet samples that come back from Hayabusa and Genesis. And as we bring Artemis samples home, they'll also be managing those and curating them. And really some of the advances in the science and measurements that we can make today that we did not have in Apollo are already getting prepared.
Great. And the very last thing I wanted to chat with you about today was the moment we've all been waiting for today, the return-powered flyby burn that occurred just 7 minutes and 9 seconds ago. So you had talked a little bit about this burn and why the timing of it was important on a Twitter post that you had shared. So can you talk a little bit more about that for the folks who maybe didn't see that?
Yeah, so all of the burns are very well calculated for specific reasons. So these burns have to be executed within moments of the timing. But really what it's doing is it's timing the return trip to Earth and then targeting so that when Orion travels behind the Earth, that's when the Pacific Ocean will be underneath the entry corridor. So we're targeting for a very thin slice of atmosphere, and that's where we do our aero capture. So the atmosphere actually slows Orion down, and we need to make sure all of that is set up precisely so that we can enter the atmosphere while the Pacific is where the entry targeting is, so that we can be landing right where the recovery forces are. So there's a lot of calculations that go into it by the wider trajectory team, but this is truly our deorbit burn. So we are doing a major maneuver right now which targets our entry in 6 days.
Great. Thank you for talking through that a little bit more. Again, that burn occurred 8 minutes ago, and once we acquire signal and we come back around on the other side, we'll be able to know if that burn was successful. We're looking ahead of that acquisition of signal now 20 minutes from now. But thank you so much, Najud, for taking some time. I know you're very busy, so I really appreciate you taking a few minutes to chat with us.
Thank you for having me. Like I said, it's really important what is going on, and I'm really excited to see this burn be successful for the conclusion of the mission.
Absolutely. We're now 17 minutes and 45 seconds away from the anticipated acquisition of signal following today's return-powered flyby burn, which took place about 11 minutes ago. That burn was 3 minutes and 27 seconds and committed us back to a return trajectory, headed back to planet Earth, where Orion will complete its 25.5-day test flight mission around the moon and beyond. Now, the last time NASA made a journey around the moon in anticipation of a return home to Earth was during the final Apollo mission in 1972. That crew launched nearly 50 years ago to the day on December 7th, 1972. As part of that flight, Commander Gene Cernan and Lunar Module pilot Harrison Smith walked on the moon, while Command Module pilot Ronald Evans orbited above. The crew splashed down on December 19th, 1972, and completed 3 spacewalks during their mission. And during Apollo 17, they orbited the moon 75 times. Now less than 15 minutes until we expect to regain communication with the Orion spacecraft. If you're just joining us today, 13 minutes and 30 seconds ago, the orbital maneuvering system on board Orion fired for 3 minutes and 27 seconds, propelling the spacecraft around the moon and placing it into a trajectory ahead of a return back to Earth. Orion will splash down on December 11th, completing a 25.5-day uncrewed test flight in which it broke the longest distance from Earth by a human-rated spacecraft meant to return back to Earth. At its furthest point from Earth, Orion was 268,563 miles from our home planet. We're about 13 minutes away from our anticipated acquisition of signal. As Orion flies around the backside of the moon, let's take a look back at what has gotten us to this point so far. First up, we start with the Space Launch System launching from Pad 39B at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. With its sights set on the moon, SLS blasted off at 12:47 a.m. Central on November 16th. You see those 4 RS-25 engines lighting up the Space Coast. You can also see the core stage climb up, as well as one of the 2 solid rocket boosters in this view. And on top of the vehicle is the launch abort system, and of course the Orion spacecraft now behind the moon. This video shows SLS and Orion's climb to orbit from the perspective of a camera on the rocket. It was about an 8.5-minute climb into orbit. You can see the launch pad grow smaller and smaller as the Space Launch System propels Orion into orbit. Following liftoff and the climb to orbit, the translunar injection burn took place. The translunar injection maneuver took place as the upper part of the rocket, officially named the Interim Cryogenic Propulsion Stage, or ICPS, fired one RL-10 engine producing 24,750 pounds of thrust to accelerate the vehicle to more than 22,600 miles per hour, a velocity fast enough to overcome the pull of Earth's gravity and propel Orion out of low Earth orbit to send the spacecraft to the moon. The TLI maneuver precisely targeted a point on the moon that guided Orion close enough to be captured by the moon's gravity. Now, right after that TLI burn, the interim cryogenic propulsion stage separated from Orion, and you do see that here in the video as it drifts further away from the spacecraft. Later that day, we received our first imagery of Earth, as well as completed the first checkout of the Orbital Maneuvering System, or OMS engine. All went smoothly, and that Orbital Maneuvering System engine was used just 17 minutes ago for the return-powered flyby burn, which lasted 3 minutes and 27 seconds. Several days later, on November 21st, Orion performed the outbound-powered flyby burn, also with that orbital maneuvering engine. This is the sister to the return-powered flyby burn. The orbital maneuvering burn sets us up in a trajectory to head out to deep space. The return-powered flyby burn sets us up on a trajectory to return back home. This video shows Orion as it approached the moon for this burn. And as we mentioned in this broadcast several times, Orion has traveled further than any human-rated spacecraft, but in this view here that was taken just shortly before that, you can see an eclipse, the moon traveling in front of the Earth, a view we don't often see here on Earth. And this photo was taken on flight day 13, November 28th, when Orion reached its maximum distance from Earth, when it was 268,563 miles away from our home planet. Orion has traveled further than any spacecraft built for humans meant to return back home. And in this video here, you see Orion's solar rays split the difference between Earth and the moon on flight day 14. This image is captured by a camera on the tip of one of the spacecraft's 4 solar arrays. And just last week, on December 1st, the distant retrograde departure burn occurred, which placed Orion in a trajectory to exit the distant retrograde orbit and head back toward the moon ahead of today's return-powered flyby, which occurred just 19 minutes 15 seconds ago. In this view here, you can see the solar arrays, gimbal, as well as a Earth in the almost center of your screen there. So as you can see, Orion has had a busy journey in its 20 days of the mission so far, but it's not finished yet. We have about 5.5 days to go until splashdown. But today's return-powered flyby burn was the first step in getting us to the splashdown point. That burn commits us to returning home. We anticipate regaining communications with the Orion spacecraft about 8 minutes and 15 seconds from now. You're looking at a view inside Mission Control Houston. This is the white flight control room. The flight director during today's shift and return powered flyby burn is NASA Flight Director Judd Freeling. You do see a few of the console positions looking a little empty. That is because we are in that loss of signal period. This is a great time for the flight controllers here in Houston to grab a quick break. Today's return-powered flyby burn occurred 22 minutes and 45 seconds ago. That burn utilized the Orbital Maneuvering System, or OMS engine, on board the Orion spacecraft. At this time, the Orion spacecraft is continuing to make its way behind the backside of the moon, and we do not have signal with the vehicle. However, we do anticipate connecting with the vehicle now less than 5 minutes and 30 seconds from now. The reason we do not have communication with the vehicle is because when we are behind the moon is blocking the signal to the Deep Space Network. We're now less than 4 minutes away from our anticipated acquisition of signal with the Orion spacecraft, which is currently traveling behind the moon following the return-powered flyby burn. This burn commits Orion to returning back to planet Earth. This return-powered flyby sends Orion close enough to the lunar surface to leverage the moon's gravitational force and swing the spacecraft into a trajectory to return back to Earth. Now, just before the burn began 25.5 minutes ago, Orion did complete its closest approach to the moon, at which point it was just under 80 miles away from the lunar surface. Beginning to see more folks trickle back into the white flight control room as we narrow in on our anticipated acquisition of signal with the Orion spacecraft, which is currently traveling behind the moon. Now 1 minute and 30 seconds away from our anticipated acquisition of signal with the Orion spacecraft. Once we acquire signal with the spacecraft, the team here in Mission Control Houston, namely the flight controllers, will be able to analyze the data that the vehicle is sending back to us in Mission Control. With that data, they'll be able to analyze if the burn was successful. Less than 1 minute away from our anticipated acquisition of signal with the Orion spacecraft. "30 seconds away from anticipated acquisition of signal. And we are standing by for acquisition of signal with the Orion spacecraft. And we do have confirmation of an acquisition of signal on the Deep Space Network in Goldstone at 11:12 a.m. Central. You're getting a view of the lunar surface from Orion's perspective. And we are hearing good confirmation that the burn was as expected. If you're just joining us, Orion completed its return-powered flyby burn, which slingshot it around the moon and committed Orion to a return trajectory back to planet Earth, hearing that that burn went smoothly and as expected. You are seeing a view on your screen of the lunar surface as well as Earth. For Orion, this is not a goodbye, but a see you later to the moon, our nearest celestial neighbor, as we begin to get our first glimpse of an Earthrise coming into frame. In this view, we see 8 billion human lives all existing upon our pale blue dot, our blue marble, our very own spaceship Earth. And after a long journey, Orion is now coming home. From this view, Orion is 1,277 miles above the lunar surface following its return-powered flyby burn, which sent it around the backside of the moon. Orion now has its sights set on home. Orion will splash down off the coast of California on December 11th. Wrapping up a 25-and-a-half-day mission. This is a view from inside the White Flight Control Room here in Mission Control, Houston. The team is being led by NASA Flight Director Judd Freeling. And this view from the Orion spacecraft as it looks to its target, planet Earth, flying over 1,200 miles above the lunar surface. At its closest approach following the return-powered flyby burn, Orion was just 80 miles above the lunar surface. The next time we see such a view, we will be hearing about it from a crew's perspective during Artemis II. Continuing to hear good performance following today's return-powered flyby burn. The Orion spacecraft is continuing to distance itself from the moon, now over 1,500 miles away from the lunar surface. Throughout the course of the next few days, we will see the distance from Earth continue to grow smaller and smaller. Orion is now 242,000 miles away from planet Earth. The spacecraft is moving at a velocity of 2,150 miles per hour.